Coogs House. The schedule for Houston's 2025 football campaign is out, and it sets up perfectly for a bunch of wins this fall.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater can step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Because you make it your first listen each and every day. If you want to join the conversation, but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. For the sake of this show, let's talk about the best road game you've ever traveled to go watch the Cougs. Because today's show is brought to you by Game Time, best place to get last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I got so excited I couldn't say it. And today we're talking about Houston's football schedule. It was released this week. Lots of stuff going on here. I want to talk about some road trips. I want to talk about some potential drawbacks here. But first and foremost, we got to talk about some of the good things in this schedule. Houston's schedule has come out. We'll go through it really quickly here in the show. In fact, for the YouTube audience, I'm going to throw it up on the screen right fast. You host Stephen F. Austin. You go across town to Rice. You host Colorado. You go to Oregon State, host Texas Tech, to Oklahoma State, host Arizona, to Arizona State, host West Virginia, to UCF, host TCU, and finish the year up at Baylor, unless you're booking tickets to Arlington for the Big 12 championship game. Lots of fun to break down in this one. Now, a couple things here I'll say first and foremost is that there's some like interesting things to the schedule. Yeah, I think I saw this like the first time in like over 60 years that you've had like consistently alternating home and away games, which is, I would argue, a good thing. You've got no back-to-back road trips. Kind of sets a rhythm and a routine for the year, right? You always come home to a road game, from a road game to a home game. You always go from a home game to a road game, right? You also open up with 3 straight games. Your first 3 games of the year are all in the city of Houston. You host SFA, go across town to Rice, and then host Colorado. That's more or less a month in the city of Houston, especially when you look at like potential the bye weeks and stuff like that, right? You have Oregon State to end September. I think that's a really good thing there because you go from August 28th, you don't have to leave the city of Houston until September 27th. That's good news. The other thing I'll say about this schedule I like a lot is honestly 2 of the tougher teams on this schedule you get pretty early. Colorado is coming to Houston on the 13th of September. Texas Tech is coming to Houston on the 10th of October. Those are both teams that are looking like they're going to have a good year next year, but they got a lot of transfers, a lot of new faces in those programs, and you're catching them pretty early before those guys have gelled a whole lot. For what it's worth, with Texas Tech, that's their second consecutive road game. They play Utah the week before to open Big 12 play for them. So honestly, that's things working your way. You finish this season up with 2 different Texas rivals. You got TCU at home and then at Baylor. That kind of adds some nice intrigue for the end of the season. That way, like if something does go awry or people are maybe down, you can still kind of like finish with some in-state bragging rights to end the year. But I think the biggest perk of this schedule is that you've got no Kansas State, no Iowa State, no BYU, no Kansas, no Utah. And when you look at FanDuel's odds to win the conference, it's a 16-team conference right now. Of the top 8 teams on FanDuel's odds at the present tense time of recording of this podcast, of the top half of the conference, you only have to play 3 of them. Now, 2 of them are on the road, but you only have to play 3 of them. And I think that's actually a really friendly schedule relative to last year. Last year, you had one of the 5 most difficult schedules based on previous season's win percentage coming in. This schedule is nowhere near that difficult based on the same kind of statistics, obviously. And there's several other things you get in a groove on with this. You have SFA, Rice, Colorado. Colorado, again, you're catching pretty early. We've also seen them, drop a few games every year. I know Deion's got it rolling. They got some 5-star quarterback coming in, but they're also having to replace a lot of talent going to the NFL. And I think that that's a good time to catch them. You then play Oregon State, and you come home to play Texas Tech. Oregon State is struggling last year. The whole P4 losing the Pac-12 has really hurt them in the transfer portal. And while it's easy to be sympathetic on the football field, that means Houston's got a real shot to knock them out as well. You host Texas Tech, which again is both not a trip to Lubbock, which is a tough place to play. Weird stuff happens in Lubbock. Look at their schedule last year. And it's so early in the season that all those transfer guys just haven't gotten to play a whole lot yet. You're catching them a week after Utah. I'm not guaranteeing anything. This basketball season taught me not to guarantee anything, but you could realistically be heading to Stillwater with a lot of people kind of talking about how Houston's surprising them this year, right? A lot of chances in those first 5 games to really kind of show off a little bit. You got Connor Wegman, you got a bunch of new offensive linemen, you got a lot of defensive returners from a top 25 defense last year in total defense. Um, you know, Still trying to make out what Oklahoma State's going to be. Big 12 championship game 2 years ago. Didn't win a Big 12 game last year, I don't think. I mean, up and down to say the least. They replaced everyone, it felt like, across the board up there in Stillwater. But going into that game, you could be anywhere between 4-1, 5-0 even, feeling pretty good about yourself realistically. And that's kind of a crazy thing to think about when you think about where this program has been the last couple of seasons. Obviously, last year's rebuilding your new coach. Year before that was probably worse than expected, but was your first year in the Big 12. And so now in your third year, you're kind of finally getting that friendly schedule. You got the FCS school in SFA to open it as well. Rice, I don't want to take them lightly. It looks like the last time you played them for a while. It also was worth the team that beat you 2 years ago. It's a rivalry game. They care about it a lot. It's at their place, which always weird things happen. I get all that, but that should be another game that goes our way. I mentioned the Oregon State thing, Colorado, Texas Tech, and the back half of the schedule with this, right? You get West Virginia at home, Arizona at home. Arizona on the road. We'll talk about a little bit in the cons section. They're projected to be really good, but they're also bringing some new guys in. Obviously, their quarterback's pretty talented, but on the whole, if you're gonna count that as a tough game wherever you play it, it's almost like might as well get that in a road game out of the way at the same time. Central Florida's a team you know pretty well. TCU's a team you beat last year. Baylor's a team you beat 2 years ago. And if you could score some points, you might have beaten them last year as well. It just feels like there's a lot of things working in Houston's favor in this one, especially if you catch a groove early, start riding some confidence, you can keep Connor Wegman healthy and upright. Things will go okay. You also, for what it's worth, are going to kind of get those first couple games to get some first experience for the coordinators and this staff. Both Austin Armstrong on the defense side of the ball and Slade Nagel on the offense side of the ball have coordinated before, but they hadn't coordinated these guys here. That's important. The first game of the year is on a Thursday night. And at first, I think a lot of people are like, what? Why a Thursday? It's Labor Day weekend. You worry about kids leaving town. You could actually get a better home crowd Thursday night than you could over the weekend. It's also got a bunch of stuff going on in town that you could pull locals away that aren't necessarily U of H guys. You pull them away to other things in town, but on Thursday night, you're kind of the only show in town. I also imagine we'll see some better TV televised options with that on a Thursday night than we would on a Saturday afternoon. It's also probably cooler on a Thursday night than it would be on a Saturday afternoon. I guess you play Saturday night, obviously, but I think this just checks a lot of boxes that you would go through if you're trying to figure out how to best suit a schedule for the University of Houston. However, it does not check all the boxes, and I want to talk about that a little bit in a second. But first, today's show is brought to you by Game Time, the best place to get last tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So if you're attending playoff games, Cougar basketball games, Rockets, Astros, Texans, concerts, theater, anything going on in around Houston, you got to get into the crowd, get in on the excitement, get in on the energy. And this year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. Filters out all the fluff, shows you only the best deals, great seats. You can focus on what matters, which is being there. I use Game Time Picks to grab tickets to actually a Rockets game. Couldn't have been easier. Great deal. incredible value, knew exactly where I was going to be sitting. Also did this for a concert recently. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time, download Game Time app today. Create an account and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Turn supply again. Create an account and redeem code Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs, about Houston's new football schedule and what is good and what is not so good about this schedule. Now, I spent a long time. I think the schedule is really good for Houston in a lot of ways, but there are things that will make it challenging. There are challenges in every schedule, and in a weird Big 12 where no one can possibly play everyone every year because there's 16 teams and frankly only 12 games on the schedule. Even if you had a conference game every week, you just couldn't quite fit everyone in, right? And so the first thing I noticed when I look at Houston's schedule is you got some really, really long road trips. As I bring it up on the screen for the YouTube audience, really long road trips. You go to Oregon State early in the season, still in September. You go to Arizona State, to Orlando for Central Florida. That's hitting every single time zone because when you play Arizona State, they're going to be in Mountain Time because they don't do daylight savings time. It's weird, but you do hit every single time zone in this schedule, which was kind of complicated. It also, again, is long road trips for all three of those games. You finish with a couple tough ones. I finished with Baylor, and I don't mean this to toot the horn of Cam Stewart locked on Baylor or Drake Toll locked on Big 12. I think Baylor's going to be pretty good next year. That could be a tough game to end the season. Also be a fun game to end the season, right? Pull a bit of big upset. And I've just for a long time to build this Baylor rivalry up. You ought to play the Saturday after Thanksgiving as you're getting into the Christmas spirit. Houston should wear red and Baylor should wear green. You should make it a big kicking off the Christmas season kind of thing to end the regular season. You got the opportunity to do that. But ending the season with a trip to Baylor is going to be rough just as far as like they're really good. Now, it adds some like value to the season. As I said in the first segment, I think that you could argue that like no matter what's happening, you're going to want to beat Baylor that final week. All these kids know each other and all of that, right? That's pretty important. I also think the road trip to Arizona State is going to be challenging. Now, obviously, they won the conference, surprised a lot of people last year, and now they're losing Cam Scatabo and all of that. Pulled in a couple great transfer running backs, including kid out of Army. And then Sam Levis is going to be the quarterback. That's a pretty big deal for them. I would argue that both Baylor and Arizona State have the best two quarterbacks not named Connor Wegman in the conference. And so that's pretty challenging to go play those guys in their home environments. That gives their offenses, I would say, an advantage, mostly because it takes the home field advantage away from our defense. I feel pretty confident in the defense, returning so many guys and stuff like that. But those two road trips are going to be tough. Outside of those road trips, your schedule's pretty friendly. And I think one thing to keep in mind about this in an era of people poo-pooing on the Big 12 is it's almost too friendly. Here's what I mean by that. Look at the schedule. There's a lot of things that work in Houston's favor. If you were to, let's say, go 9-3 and drop Arizona, Baylor, and insert other team, just because I've called those teams recently, or I just talked about those teams a second ago, right? Let's say you drop 3 of those games. 9-3, successful season. You think you're pretty good, but the nation's going to look at the strength of schedule here and be like, whoa. Ainsworth, Coogs, Fritz, y'all could have won more games. And they're going to look at it as being an easier schedule based on strength of schedule than other places. And we also know, just having looked at what happened in the Big 12 last year, we can argue pretty easily that it was wrong, right? But the 8 or 9 wins that Houston gets will be looked at differently than the 8 or 9 wins that insert bum SEC school gets or insert bum Big 10 school gets, just because they're Big 12 wins, right? It's hard to win football games, but it's easy to win hypothetical ones. And so SEC is going to argue that their 8 wins are better or whatever, right? So those kinds of things are going to hurt you a little bit in the big picture, the end of season rankings and all those kinds of things. And I know that that's not the big, like just one step at a time. Like I already see 2 of you that are frequently commenting this kind of stuff on football videos that that's too far down the line. Let's just win some games first. And that's totally fair, right? That's totally fair, totally valid. I do think, though, that it is a concern when I feel pretty confident this team is going to surprise a lot of people next year. Last year, Arizona State won this conference after being the preseason 16th team in the league, right? I don't know if I'm necessarily going to go from 16 to first. You can't go much bigger than that, obviously. But I do think Houston's going to surprise people next year with new starting offensive linemen, more time in the pocket to throw, the same running backs where Sean Sanford can be a year fat, Burnett can be a year older. It sounds like we may be bringing Tony Mathis back too. Great stuff going on back there. And we talked about Wegman probably once a week as far as the football shows go, especially this offseason. All kinds of big time things going on the offense. The defense returned so much. I just worry the schedule, if they win 8 or 9 games and it's a great year, isn't going to be good enough for some of those hoity-toity kind of, what the SEC button downs and the bow ties and those. It might not be quite enough for all that. And I understand that it's not actually a big deal. I do think though that getting ranked somewhere, getting accolades for it would go a long way for Willie Fritz's second year in the program. And I say that to say that I'm not trying to call games and predict games right now. I want to do that some in the summer once the rosters are fully settled and spring ball's over and all that. And frankly, if basketball season has taught me anything, it's to not predict games, because when I get confident, I think that we can beat a team by a lot, things go wrong. When I feel not confident, things are going to go south, they win in double overtime. So obviously, maybe that's not the way to go with this. But I do think that it's a schedule that is friendly to Houston. And if they start winning games, I worry that could be a negative thing. The other big negative thing about this schedule is that your bye weeks are pretty far apart. Your bye dates, as far as Saturdays go, are the 20th of September and the 15th of November. And so that's 7 straight weeks. You only play on Saturday. Yeah, the first game on a Thursday, the rest of your games on Saturdays. But that's 7 straight weeks of real conference football, and that can be a grind, both mentally and physically, very, very taxing. And I know that Fritz is a great mental between the ears strength conditioning kind of guy, and I'm not worried about him not having the guys ready. I'm more worried about that many body blows without a break, right? That's 7 straight conference football games with no bye week in between. And then, frankly, to add to the absurdity of it, you have your second bye week on the 15th, and you only have 2 regular season games left after that, right? And now, while I said earlier, those 2 games could add a lot of meaning to your season because you're ending with 2 in-state rivals in TCU and Baylor, and you got an extra week to prepare for those, right? It also means that, okay, you got 1 week to go play those 2 games, and it's okay, and then we potentially have a month before a bowl game. Those kind of things can get wonky. I guess if you go to Arlington, only have 1 week between Baylor and that, but that's that's a long that's a long stretch in the middle of the year that doesn't seem to make any sense. Obviously, beggars can't be choosers, and a lot of things about the schedule are good for Houston. I'd much rather have that bye week after Arizona State. They play a physical brand of football. You kind of spend a week recovering before you go into West Virginia, before you host West Virginia, and kind of go in some games against lesser opponents, I should say. Maybe that's where I'd put it, but I'd like to, in the comments down below, or wherever you found this podcast, or if you find me on social media at Painswift512, where do you think the bye week thing's a real problem, or where would you put it? Because I think that's probably the thing that other people would agree about the most. The travel, this conference, you're gonna do it. Finish with a tough team. You didn't play that many, and like I said, you got kind of a good schedule in that sense, because you miss out on a couple of the top teams in conference and the preseason kind of stuff. But on the whole, I do worry about what that's going to do. Those nagging injuries, that one hit to the ribs, someone put their face masks on your side, those kind of things I think kind of add up over time when you don't have that bye week. And frankly, going 7 weeks without a bye week feels very NFL, to me. It just does. I'm looking at that like it's a long time, but maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure you'll tell me in the comments down below. Now, I did want to tell you one thing as I was looking through this, because I feel like we have, a growing fan base. The Houston Cougar brand is growing every year, and I really kind of appreciated watching it grow with the show. And there's some road trips in here. I mentioned you're playing in every time zone, and I want to talk about what road trips could be the best trip, which one could be the best one to go to right fast. But first, Locked on Coogs, Parker Ainsworth here, talking about the best road trips on the Houston Cougar football schedule. Now, you got a road game every other week, although technically one's at Rice, so it's only kind of a road game. And a handful of trips that are fairly familiar. And I want to talk through kind of like what I'm looking at as far as like if you're going to pick a road game to go to. Obviously, I mean, Rice is not really a road game, so that doesn't quite count at the start of the season. Orlando is a fun trip if you've never been because you can kind of rope in a Disney day or whatever. Or maybe you can get out to the water one day or something. You can make a couple days out of it. And Houston does play UCF kind of late in the year in November, so it shouldn't be super hot in Florida and all that, right? So if you haven't done Orlando, I guess that could be one. Houston's played UCF in conference play so often in the last handful of years that I don't. I mean, they're both in the American Athletic Conference, and they play each other each year in the Big 12 so far. I don't know that it would be somewhere I feel like you gotta go or anything like that. Um, not telling you to go to Oklahoma State and Stillwater. Um, for people in Oklahoma that want to go camping, there's like all kinds of cool spots up there for that. I guess that's just not what I'm going to recommend for road trip. You can do that any off-season weekend, right? I'm not going to take it to Waco and Baylor because it's Waco and Baylor, and I'm not going to do that to you. At least two other road trips I think you got to look at though, and I think the most unique road trip is Oregon State. Um, it's about an hour north of Eugene. So if you went there a couple years back when Houston went up to play basketball, it's not really the same vibe of the state. It, like I said, hour north of Eugene. Corvallis has a lot of outdoor woods and mountains, wineries and breweries, and a big like investment in that kind of culture. Uh, it's closer to Eugene than Seattle. You're like 4 hours from Seattle, but you're really in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. Corvallis is like a collegey feeling town. This is also me talking to people up there. I'm not a Pacific Northwest guy, but that's the vibe everyone would describe it as. And so I'm interested in that trip. If you're going to make a road trip and make a roadie out of one, mostly because it's just different. We don't get that kind of, I mean, for all the parts of the country the Big 12 plays in, the Pacific Northwest is not one of them. And when we talk about adding a Gonzaga or whatever in basketball, you don't get up there a whole lot, right? So it's good to take advantage of that and kind of get to go see a different part of the country, add that into the weekend as you're making the trip out there for the game, right? Other one being Tempe, Arizona. And sure, I guess you could have gone to Houston, played at Arizona last year in Tucson, U of A, that is in Tucson last year. But they're really different towns. Tempe is kind of almost Phoenix. And, Phoenix has the big museums. They advertise the hot air balloon rides. There's a really cool when I was, talking to people what to do. I had to Google it to make sure I was looking at it correctly. The Heard Museum is like a Native American art museum because you're kind of in that part of the country. For what it's worth, if you went to the University of Arizona game last year when Houston played out there, Arizona State's about 2 hours closer to the Grand Canyon. So if you're trying to add that into the trip somehow, you can. It's not as hot in that part of the year. You're playing them in mid-October. Tons of hikes, big red deserty mountains, all things Arizona. Also worth arguing that this is probably the best game of the roadies. Arizona State, like I said, won the conference last year, returned Sam Levitt, like a lot of talent there. You can end up in kind of watching a fun offensive shootout kind of game. I think Houston's defense will be good, but can only do so much in college football. The rules are very offensive across the board, and they got a pretty good offense. And so I think that's the one I'd pick. I was picking one game to go watch. I'd say Arizona State, even though you'll probably be there again in the near future. I don't understand going to Oregon State over Arizona State because of that. And while I poo-pooed Waco and Stillwater and Orlando, there are things to do in those places. There will be other Coogs there. In Waco, there's the Dr. Pepper Museum and that kind of stuff. Or if you're a Chip and Joanna kind of person, I guess that's fair. I have not been to a game at the Baylor football stadium, I should say. But it's very nice. You drive by on I-35. It's like on the water. People will be like tailgating on boats and stuff like that. Stillwater. Well, in my coaching, I said high school teacher and coach, or high school basketball coach specifically. We went up there and played in a team camp on their campus. Boone T. Pickens' name is everywhere. It was a nice campus. There's not a whole lot else to do up there, obviously, but if you're trying to see another campus, it's worth seeing. Um, I I just don't think I'm gonna make those treks if I'm recommending going to one road game. Now, obviously, for support, go to all of them if you can. I'm not gonna tell you not to go to them, but I I just if I'm like picking one to make a trip out of because I'm making my one trip of the fall or whatever. I think I'm leaning Arizona State. Now, with that said, that's probably also, you could argue, part of the thing that you lose in this schedule being so friendly. Boulder and the Denver area and all that would have been a great road trip that you kind of missed out on, right? As far as other big campuses and stuff like that, you're not going to get to go see. Last year, we got to go see Norman, Oklahoma, and see what's going on there. It's a couple times in the last decade they've gotten to go there, right? Last decade, yeah. And so I guess you could look at those kind of things as maybe things you missed out on with this schedule. I'm not super worried about that. As a guy that watches all his games on TV for the most part, um, for a variety of reasons, I guess. But I look at a lot of this schedule and think that, like, if the worst part of it is that you got to go to Arizona State and that's your only real fun road trip, yeah, there are worse things. And I think it's a really winnable schedule, a good schedule for Houston, top to bottom. Do I wish they were playing, UT Austin or an A&M or somebody with a real like tight rivalry so you could beat up on someone and have fun? Yes. But in the Big 12, I think that's what you're going to do. And I am excited about the games they got. Now, obviously, as we get further into the offseason, we got spring practices. We got some dates on that from Fritz. So we got spring practices and things to break down with that. Transfer players, including Connor Wegman, people to break down there. We got the whole summertime to kind of go through game by game, week by week, kind of look at what things could be happening for the Houston Cougars. We got a whole basketball season to finish. We're only halfway through. There's a bonus episode coming out in a few minutes as well to talk about Houston and Colorado and all of that. So Locked On Cougs here to do all things Houston Cougars each and every day, and a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network while we do it. Thanks for making us first listen, Locked On Cougs. I'm going to recommend the Locked On Big 12 for your next one. Big 12 squad this week was a lot of fun. We actually talked a little football. Who knew? Go check that out as well. Locked On Cougs, primary Locked On Podcast, your team every day. Go Cougs.